On the morning of May 1st, 1945, Karl Dönitz was sitting at his desk in northern Germany, reading a telegram and trying to make sense of what it said. The message was from the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, and it informed him that Adolf Hitler was dead and that Donitz had been named President of Germany, not a military commander and not a temporary administrator, but the actual head of state. The most powerful civilian office in the country had just been handed to a man who had spent his entire career below the surface of the ocean commanding submarines and who had absolutely no idea what to do with it. He read the message again and then a third time, and then he called his staff together and told them what had happened, and for a long moment nobody in the room said anything at all. Karl Dönitz was not supposed to be here, and he was not a politician and not a member of Hitler's inner circle in any meaningful sense. He was a naval officer who was gifted and disciplined and completely devoted to the German submarine campaign that had come closer than almost any other single military effort to winning the war in the Atlantic. His U-boats had hunted Allied shipping across the ocean, and at the height of the campaign in 1942, they were sinking vessels faster than the Allies could build replacements. Churchill later admitted that the U-boat threat was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. And that campaign and the man behind it had earned Hitler's complete and unconditional trust. And that trust on the night of April 29th had made Donitz the most reluctant head of state in modern history. The reason Donitz got the job tells you everything you need to know about the state of the Third Reich in its final hours, because Hitler's original succession plan had fallen apart completely. Hermann Göring had sent a telegram asking permission to assume leadership of the Reich, and Hitler had interpreted it as a coup attempt and had him arrested, and Heinrich Himmler had gone behind Hitler's back and attempted to open secret surrender negotiations with the Allies, and when Hitler found out, he was finished too. With both of his most powerful lieutenants gone, Hitler needed someone he could trust absolutely, and Donitz was the last man standing. He received the job not because he was the best candidate, but because everyone else had disqualified themselves. What followed over the next 23 days is one of the most bizarre episodes in the history of modern government. Donitz packed up what remained of the German administration and moved it to a naval school in the town of Flensburg near the Danish border, which was the only corner of Germany not yet occupied by Allied forces. And there in a sports hall, the government of the Third Reich held its final cabinet meetings where they discussed policy and debated procedure and argued about the correct format for official communications. And in one meeting that historians have never been able to fully explain, they spent a considerable amount of time discussing whether the portraits of Adolf Hitler hanging on the walls of their headquarters should be taken down. Outside the building, Allied armies were waiting, and the war was over in every sense that mattered, and the last government of Nazi Germany was arguing about paintings. Donitz himself was clear-eyed enough to understand that his presidency had exactly one purpose, which was to buy time. Not to govern and not to rebuild, but simply to keep enough structure functioning for long enough to allow the surrender to happen in an orderly way, and above all, to keep German forces in the East fighting just long enough for millions of civilians and soldiers to flee westward away from the Soviet advance. The Baltic evacuation that took place in those final weeks moved somewhere between 500,000 and 2 million people to safety, and every day that the Flensburg government continued to exist was another day that evacuation could continue. The Allies knew exactly what Donitz was doing, and they allowed it because a structured collapse was far better than complete chaos. On May 23rd, British soldiers arrived at the naval school and arrested everyone. Donitz was taken away in his full admiral's uniform and was later tried at Nuremberg, where he was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to 10 years in prison, and he served every single day of that sentence before being released in 1956 and living quietly in a small German town until his death in 1980, never apologizing and never admitting wrongdoing and maintaining to the end that he had simply been a sailor doing his duty. The families of the thousands of merchant sailors his submarines had killed saw it very differently. History barely remembers Karl Dönitz and the 23 days he spent as president of Germany, and in some ways that is understandable because his story does not fit neatly into any category history likes to use for figures from that era. He was not a mass murderer in the way that Himmler was, and not a propagandist in the way that Goebbels was, and not a disgrace in the way that Göring was. He was something stranger than any of those things. A competent professional who served a criminal regime loyally and efficiently, and who was handed its wreckage at the very end and tried to do something useful with it in the 3 weeks before the lights went out for good. The Flensburg government lasted 23 days and controlled almost no territory and commanded almost no army and was recognized by nobody. And yet without it, the end of the war in Europe might have been considerably more chaotic and considerably more deadly than it actually was. Karl Dönitz sat in a sports hall near the Danish border and presided over the death of the Third Reich, and then went to prison for it, and history moved on without ever deciding what to make of him. And perhaps that is the most honest ending a story like his deserves.